So I'll send that quote around. I'll send it after the shiur. All right. So this week's parsha is Miketz. So the main thing that happens in Miketz is Miketz at the end of, and that's where it starts out. Vayehi Miketz shnatayim yamim, right? And at the end of 2 years, it happens that Paro. So it's at the end of 2 years of what? At the end of 2 years of Yosef. Remember, he was thrown in jail. Right. So it's the end of 2 years of Yosef sitting in a hole. Just imagine, like the Syrians.
Sat in the hole for 2 years.
Nothing changed. Nothing changed in 4,000 years, right? They put somebody in a hole 10 years ago. This boy was in the same hole thousands of years ago. Okay, so after 2 years there, Paro has the famous dreams, right? He has the first dream. There are 7 good-looking cows by the Nile River, and they're all looking very nice and very healthy. And then he sees 7 ugly cows come up. They look very gaunt. They're starving, and they come and they eat the 7 healthy cows. Then he wakes up and he has another dream the next day or whatever during this time, and he's got 7 healthy ears of grain, and then 7 very weak ones, unhealthy ones, and the 7 thin ones, the unhealthy ones, eat the 7 healthy ones, and he's very uncomfortable. And it even says, it says, if you look at on 255 verse 8, it says in the morning his mind was buzzing with agitation. He was very agitated about the dreams. He didn't know what they were, and one of the Mefarshim says he actually understood them when he was asleep, but by the time he woke up, he didn't know what they meant anymore, right? So he was very frustrated. So what happens? So very interestingly, the chief butler, the guy who was pouring the wine and everything, don't forget, he's the guy Yosef said, you're going to be saved, where the baker was, he said your head's going to be removed from you, right? So in fact, the butler does go back, and he's still serving Paro, the king, and Paro's upset about, he doesn't understand the dreams, and this butler remembers Yosef. So all this whole thing, this whole adventure starts with this one man remembering something. Memory, very important. It's going to come back later. We're going to talk about this. Memory, that's where it starts. He remembers that Yosef remembered how correctly interpreted his dream, right? So the butler, the wine pourer, the sar hamashkim, right? We always make a joke, right? Always the sar hamashkim, right? That's where it comes from here, right? The guy who's like, pouring the bourbon, everybody jokes, oh, he's the sar hamashkim. This is where it comes from, right? So they go and they bring Yosef out of the dungeon, and it specifically says they cut his hair, they gave him a shave, they put on clothes because he was going to the king. The kid was a mess. Just imagine, he's spending 2 years in a hole, right? So he goes out, and Paro says to him, if you look on 257, verse 15, he says, I have these dreams, I don't know what they mean. But look what Yosef says to him. I want to read the Hebrew because I don't trust the English. Vayan Yosef et Paro lemor beladai Elohim Yaneh et shlom Paro. He says, not me. I don't understand it. God gives me the power, right? Keep it in mind. Yosef says, not me. God gives me the power to do this. I don't have it by myself. So Paro explains the dreams to him, and Yosef interprets them again famously. He says, look, there's going to be 7 good years in Egypt. Very, strong years, good crops and everything. But after those 7 years, it's going to be a famine. He says, what you really should do is you should appoint somebody very smart and very clever to oversee what happens. Somebody who is going to ensure against the future. And he's like very clever because he's actually saying you should appoint somebody very smart to do this. He's implying himself, right? And Paro understands that, and Paro puts him in charge. And then what he does is very, very smart. As soon as he's taking the food, he puts a big tax on the farmers, and he's collecting, and he puts everything in silos. when the famine hits, people are starving. What does Yosef do? He says, I'll give it to you. He goes, give your land up. Give your land up and I'll give you food. So Paro winds up owning all of Egypt because all the people who all held any private land gave it up because they were going to starve otherwise. So Paro winds up holding everything. Yosef is now the second in command. Paro puts him in charge of everything, right? And if you remember last week, what happened when he was in the house of Potiphar, in the house of the... Remember, he was in the house when he first was a slave. He was running the household of this officer. Yeah. So he was running the household, and even then it said, without Yosef, this guy didn't know what was going on. All he knew was, I'm eating the bread. Literally, that's all. That's what it said, right? So Yosef now he goes to the king, and he's so smart and so successful and so able to adapt in the material world that now he's doing the same thing for the whole country of Egypt, gladly, right? And they're happy to have him do it, right? And he's accumulating power for Paro, right? He's accumulating power, land, and everything, right? And he gets a new name, Safkat Parnea, I think, Safnat Parnea. He's given an Egyptian name. If you look on page 261 at the bottom, page 45, right? He has an Egyptian name. And not only he has an Egyptian name, if you look at 261 over to 263, he's given Osnat, the daughter of Potiphar, the guy he worked for, that remember the wife said he tried to rape me? He's marrying now this guy's daughter, right? The daughter of an high officer, he's married to her. She's not Jewish, she's, right? And by the way, just a sidebar, little tidbit of information. My lovely wife Rena's middle name is Osnat. Osnat is this woman. So that she becomes the wife of Yosef, right? And sure enough, that's what happens. Yosef then has two boys with Osnat, and it's very interesting. So the first one is Menashe, and if you look at what it says on page 263, verse 51, because in the Hebrew translation is, God caused me to forget my hardships in my father's house, right? Which is a strange, if you think about it, a strange thing, right? It doesn't mean that he forgot his father, but he just had a little bit of comfort, right? And there's a whole thing about why he didn't call his father all this time. He was down there, he never called his father. There's like all different kinds of interpretations of why he didn't. But he didn't even do the thing where he calls and says, "Is Yosef there?" And Yaakov said, "I got it. Yosef's not here." Hangs up. Not even that. But it's interesting. And then he names his second son is Ephraim. These boys are going to become important. I think it's next week. Menashe and Ephraim become important for different reasons next week. That's his second son, Menashe, right? The famine comes, and if you look on to page 265, all right, everybody's starving, and he puts the plan in place. Now, in the meantime, the famine isn't restricted to Egypt, right? It's in Canaan, so it's impacting his old family home where he used to live, and they're starting to starve. So the boys say to...
is there anything in history that corresponds with this?
Confirms it?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I'm not sure, but I don't think so. Yeah. So I don't think there is. Like archaeologically, I don't think so.
That or,
I don't think so.
Some climate changes or something like that.
Yeah.
So So basically, so now the brothers now say to the dad, they say to Yaakov, listen, we're going to starve here. We need to go down to Egypt to get food because they have a ruler there who's got food. So we're going to go down there. So they go. So they go down there, and if you look at 267 on the top, Yosef recognizes them. When they come down there to get food, they have to ask him, right? He's the main minister in charge of the food.
And they didn't recognize him.
They didn't recognize him. Don't forget, he is at this point. We're going to come back to this, but right. So they didn't recognize him because he's like almost, I don't know if assimilated is the right word exactly, but he's like an Egyptian, right? He's dressed like an Egyptian. They shaved him. They dressed him. He looks like an Egyptian. He speaks their language, right? He looks like they look. He sounds like they sound. They would never even dawn on them that their brother that they sold it's like 10, 20 years later, I think.
Right.
And they would never imagine. He's 30. I think he's around 30 at this point, right?
He got married.
So they would never imagine. And they can't recognize him. He doesn't sound like him, but he recognizes them, right? So he immediately says to them, now it's debatable why he's all doing this, right? Could be just vengeance, and then things change, and there's all kinds of different explanations of why he did this. But let's go with the most simple thing. He's pretty mad, right? So he says, no, you didn't come down here for food. You came down here to spy. Don't forget, the Egyptians had a huge mistrust of foreigners, not unusual in any country, right? And don't forget, speaking of the mistrust of foreigners, when Yosef, when they describe him, when Potiphar says, "Oh, I remember a guy," not Potiphar, when the Sar Hamashkim says, "Oh, I was in jail with this guy," he says he was a Hebrew, right? They remember he's a foreigner. And when he comes up, it actually says here that when he was even already in the house of Paro, he didn't eat with them because that wasn't acceptable to the Egyptians. He didn't eat with the Egyptians. He was a Hebrew. He was a Jew, so he wasn't allowed to. But he looks like them. He's taken on all their affectations, but he's not one of them. And so they say, he says, we're not. They say we're not spies. We came here just for food. He says no. He goes, no, you're spies. And he says, interestingly, they say we're brothers. They volunteer all this information, which is a mistake, right? You would always tell your kids, say as little as possible, right? They start telling all this information. They say, no, we're sons. We have a father, an older father. We have a younger brother. He's back there, and our father and one brother was lost. They're talking about Yosef, right? And then one brother was lost. So Yosef says to them, listen, you're not getting any food. He doesn't say you're not getting any food. He's going to give them food, but he says, I'm not going to let you go. You have to come back with this youngest brother. Come back with this youngest brother, then we'll talk. And he says, in the meantime, we're going to hold one as collateral. And which guy does he ask for? Shimon. Why does he get Shimon?
Because he's the most dangerous one.
He's the most vicious one of all of them, right? Him and Levi. We've gone through this already, right? They're the guys they're the murderous guys. And Shimon's the worst, is even worse because Levi at least had a purpose.
What, he kept Shimon or he sent Shimon?
He keeps Shimon, he sends the rest of them back.
Him and throw
See,
him.
it's not what
Right.
the book says. It's the opposite.
No, he took him out.
Send one of you and let him fetch your brother and the rest will be in prison. So he's sending only one out. And the
No,
rest
he keeps Shimon.
He took him on the one of his,
you need a
from among them and imprisoned him. So it's in 24, verse 24.
If you're not hemming, I'll hem.
Okay.
Yeah, right. Thank you, Jeff. By the way, a big thank you to Jeff because the theme, I was like, Jeff focused me a little bit. I had like an idea and then Jeff sent me almost like an outline, which was very helpful.
Listen, we can only have one side.
Now here's an interesting thing. He put them here. Here's an interesting thing. It says if you look at the top of page 269, it says he put them in prison for 3 days. So we're gonna do a little bit on customs, right? These weird customs that we have. So here's the 3 days. There's an interesting custom I saw online. Some people take out the menorah 3 days before the first day of Chanukah, and they keep it out even after Chanukah's over. They keep the menorah out 3 more days. Where does that minhag come from? Right here. Because they kept him in prison for 3 days.
But again, it says they kept all the brothers.
They kept all of them in prison for 3 days. Then they sent them home. And they kept Shimon.
Oh, that's what it is. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So
Where's the correlation?
the correlation, good things happen. Because good things ultimately happened. They were in prison, but ultimately good things happened. So the minhag became to take out the menorah 3 days earlier. I never heard it before. I saw it, the magic of the internet. I saw it on like a TikTok.
What do you mean?
No
like,
joke.
like unpacking things?
A
Yeah,
TikTok?
yeah. I saw it on like a TikTok, a reel. I saw it. I'm not joking. I saw it on a reel.
My father always likes.
There you go. I never heard it before. Took it 3 days early.
And I do it.
And you do it too.
Chanukah.
Yeah. And Chanukah. My brother used to always.
Yes.
No, so they take it. So, but you don't. You.
Pay attention.
So you take it out and you put it out. You put out the menorah.
I have a little table by the window.
Yeah.
Where I display it.
And you put it out before. There you go. So
That's what Israelis do.
And this is supposed to be mazel?
Well, Syrians light another candle.
right, we're gonna get to that. There's another shamash also.
They do it.
Correct.
For good luck.
Correct. So we talk about there's some interesting different minhagim that
In case
you
the
know.
first Shabbos doesn't
So
work.
there's some interesting things.
You gotta
Okay,
back up.
so let's get back to this because we're never going to get through everything otherwise. So okay, so they take Shimon, and he goes. So
Shimon still
so
has no clue also that it's his brother.
so nobody has a clue. Nobody has a clue. So so they go back, and they tell the father, listen, if we want food, we have to go back with Binyamin. And the father is distraught because don't forget, he loved Rachel most. He already lost one son from Rachel. He only has one son from Rachel left. He doesn't want to lose him. And he loved the kid, right? He was the youngest kid and all that. He's like, I'm not sending him back. Now here's an interesting thing. What?
Did Joseph remember Binyamin or made him?
He must have, a little bit at least. So here's an interesting thing. Now we've been talking about, and we're going to continue talking about the dynamic between Ruvain and Yehuda. Ruvain was the oldest child. And we've talked a couple of times about how he kind of, even though he's the oldest, he lost the right to be the leader. Even though he's the oldest, he should have been the leader. But we talked about a few times different things that he did that showed that he's not leadership material. Doesn't mean he's a bad guy, but he wasn't leadership material. Here's another one. So when Yaakov says, no, I'm not giving my son, look at what Ruvain says. It's on page 271, verse 37. He says, you may put my 2 sons to death if I don't bring Benjamin back to you. Right? Put him in my care, I will return him to you. Yaakov says no. He won't do it, right? But what happens later, the famine gets worse. Now Yehuda, as he often does, he is the leader. He takes the leadership role. And if you look at page 273, he says, verse 8, Judah said to his father, send the lad with me. Let us get going and travel. Then we'll live and we won't die of hunger, right? Both us and you and the children. I will guarantee his safe return. You can demand him from my hand. If I do not bring him to you alive, I will have sinned against you forever. Look at the difference between what Ruvain says and Yehuda says. On its face, it's not that different. Give him to me, I'll guarantee his safety, right? But no, Ruvain says, you can kill my children if I don't bring them back. Yehuda doesn't put it off on anybody. He says, it's my responsibility. I take responsibility. If something happens, I'm responsible. That's a huge difference. It's a huge difference. And he's showing again the leadership skills that's innate to him. And this is why, and we keep talking about this because it's relevant today. We are descendants of Yehuda. Almost all of us, right? We're Levim, but we're almost all descendants of this guy. And he's the guy who showed the leadership. He's the guy who continually stands up. his descendants. It's not an accident. It's not an accident. Okay? So finally, Yaakov says to him, okay. And what's also interesting here is they call Yaakov, they keep calling him Yisrael. Over here, they keep calling him by the new name, Yisrael, right? The man who battles with God, right? He is still afraid. We talked about that too, right? He's still very afraid of a lot, but he's willing to move forward. He's willing to fight. So he says, okay. He goes, we're gonna, we need to do it. So he says, okay, take him down. But he's distraught about it. The truth is, he's distraught about it. He goes, you're gonna. In Hebrew, it's very beautiful. He says, you're gonna bring my head down in sorrow to the grave, because he's gonna miss his son. He already misses his older son. Okay, so that's what they do. And Yaakov says to him, he says, and take extra gifts, take the nicest things from our land, whatever they had left, the good. As we know, they grow dates and oils and stuff, and they pistachios, and they bring it all down to him, and they say, okay. So Yosef says, okay, bring Shimon out to them. That's page 277, and then he sees Benjamin, right, and he gets very overcome. If you look at verse 31, he gets very overcome when he sees his little brother. He has to leave the room. He has to wash his face. He has to compose himself. He comes out, and then they have a meal. At the bottom of page 277, verse 33, they have a whole meal, and if you notice, he says Benjamin's portion was 5 times as large as any of their portions. We're going to talk about that, because there's also interesting things that have to do with this 5 portions, the things people learn in Minhagim from these little things, right? And then when they're ready to leave, right? Oh, by the way, I forgot to say this earlier. When they think he's going to kill them, he says, no. He goes, I fear God. Remember that. He says, I fear God. He uses the Jewish word. He doesn't use one of their gods. He goes, Yareh Elokim ani, right? He says, I fear God. It's important, right? Because it's a hint that he's not totally assimilated. Anyway, so now he's going to send them on their way. But then, right at the end, he goes, wait, I'm missing a goblet. I'm missing a goblet. And the boys, the brothers all say, hey, Dennis. The brothers all say, well, we didn't take the goblet. You can't, do anything to all of us. And he says, and he planted the goblet in Benjamin's sack. Yosef. He plants the goblet in Benjamin's sack. And he says, no. He goes, it's okay. He goes, if somebody has the goblet, he's guilty. I'm keeping him with me. And the rest of you can go on the way. And it's in Benjamin's thing. So I heard an amazing thing this week that I'm going to talk about right now, and then we'll go back to it next week. You always think, why would he do that, right? Just to scare the crap out of them is what I've always thought. But I saw an amazing thing today by that guy I told you about. Think about this. I only saw this today. We'll resolve it next week. What if he said, I'm a son of Rachel. Benjamin's a son of Rachel. These SOBs tried to kill me already. They're going to try to kill my brother. I got to figure out a way to get him out of their hands. And this is how I'm going to do it. You're all innocent, but this kid has to stay with me. He didn't want to kill Benjamin, and he didn't even want to make them feel bad. And he wasn't even testing them. He wanted to separate Benjamin from the sons of Leah, who all of them participated. And don't forget, it was Shimon and Levi who said kill him. It was Yehuda who said sell him. It was Reuven who said put him in a hole. Those were the 4 sons of Leah. So under what this guy said, which was I never heard this before, maybe he was just trying to separate them out to protect them. Right. I never heard that before. I thought that was crazy. Right, he gave him more food because he loves his brother.
But also, you would think it would create some question or the beginnings of some animosity where
True.
they would.
Good point. Bring it up next week. Bring it up next week. That's a good point. I didn't think of that.
They're gonna both bring the father, no brother.
We'll see what happens next week. It's like a cliffhanger. Seriously, it's like a cliffhanger. Because that's the end of the Parsha. That's it. We don't know what happens till next week. Okay. So what's the connections? I asked, what's the connections between this Parsha and Chanukah, right? It's always read around Chanukah time. It's always read usually during Chanukah, right? So it's all over the place. That's a big question that people ask all the time. So there's all different kinds of answers that are very interesting. So one, I'm gonna start with one it's like a little less deep, and then we'll get to something that's really cool. So one of them was from a Rabbi Menachem creditor. He said, he goes, the lesson of the dreams. He goes to the dreams right away. So he says the lesson of the dreams is about appreciating things, because there were 7 years. The dreams were saying, look, you have 7 years of plenty. Then there's going to be famine. What are you doing with the time when you have got plenty? What are you doing with your time? You have to appreciate when you have good things. So, and then what was amazing, the reason I'm really bringing it up is because he says, every morning we say Modeh. And I know the rabbi's big with the Modeh now. That's the new thing. So I saw this. I said, well, I got to bring it up. Why do we say Modeh? It's not understood. How do you say Muvan Me'elav in English? It's not understood from the beginning. It's not clear that we're going to wake up in the morning. That's why we say Modeh. What is Modeh? I'm thanking God that He restored my soul overnight. It's not understood that we're going to wake up in the morning. It's not understood that we're going to go to the bathroom, that we're going to walk, that we're going to be healthy. It's just not. We take it for granted. But God is, first of all, we say Modeh to acknowledge that it's a gift. Every minute is a gift. We wake up in the morning, it's a gift. And this whole thing about these dreams, when he had plenty, is, remember, don't take things for granted. You got 7 years of plenty, plan, but do well. You've got 7 years of blessing. Every minute is a blessing. And
Isn't crop rotation also every 7 years you gotta move your land?
that's, yeah, Shemitah. Yeah, seven's a big number. So, right, nature and not, right. We could talk about that. Bring that up too.
So what does it do with Chanukah? So I didn't see the connection yet.
I didn't get there yet.
Oh.
So this whole thing. So all these things start with dreams, right? And Chanukah is a time where we should ask. Each candle is a light, right? Individual candle is a light. Those lights represent our dreams, our aspirations, right? And this whole parsha starts with the dreams, right? So Chanukah is a time when we should remember, because don't forget, it all started with the remembrance of this minister, right? We start out remembering things, remembering what we can do, remembering that we have good things that we have to be thankful for, and we should be able to rise to those challenges that we see all the time. That is exactly the reason I put this first, and the reason I brought it up is mainly because of Modeh, because I agree with you. The connection I thought was not great. It was a little bit of a tenuous connection, but I like the whole Modeh angle because of Rabbi Tannenbaum. So I did want to. That's really why I brought that up.
Pharaoh, that he should be thankful, right, for having these dreams and for him being able to put enough of these pieces together to get his brother back.
Listen, so what we'll see is next week, when all this stuff happens, what Yosef says. Next week, we're going to talk about also exactly that question: who's in control, basically, and why did these things happen? So now it's twice you're 1 week ahead. Just remember to bring all this stuff up, because next week we're going to answer all those questions, exactly those questions. So okay, so now more connections to this. All right, so
So what's the Chanukah connection again? I still don't know.
the light and the remembrance, and we should remember that, that we can do these things. It's a little tenuous. It's a little tenuous.
It is.
I'll give you that. Okay, but I did like the whole Moda'ani part of it. Okay, so now, more, like I said, that was like a little tenuous. This is, I think, better. That's why I started with that. So what we see also here is that this prophecy that Yosef was able to do, this understanding, started with his humility. Where do we see his humility, right? Don't forget, this is a guy, he dressed like the Egyptians, he looked like them, he walked like an Egyptian, if anybody wants to make the joke.
I'll sing the song.
You get it?
Is that the Go-Go's?
It is the
I think so,
Go-Go's,
yeah.
yeah.
I thought it was Steve Martin.
And Steve Martin. So he seemed to be this very high up guy. He seemed to be very assimilated into their culture. But when you look at it carefully, what he did, he's always remembering Hashem. He's constantly remembering it. So this week we saw it when the brothers are nervous. He goes, I am Yireh Hashem. He goes, I fear God. He goes, no, don't worry.
Also with Pharaoh, when he said, it's not me interpreting it.
It's not me interpreting it. It's God. And if you remember last week, when Potiphar's wife wanted to have sex with him, what did he say? He goes, I can't do it. My master trusted me, and he gave me everything but you. And then he says, and I can't do it. It would violate God's law. He says, I can't do it. I'm in front of God, right? He's remembering God again. And we're going to see next week, which I'm going to partially answer your question now. Next week, when he reveals himself to the brothers and the brothers are frightened, he says, don't worry. He goes, this was all done in God, by God.
If Gil revealed
God-
himself to me, I'd be frightened too.
God put everything in motion. He sent me down here to save you, right? So in every phase of what he's doing, he says God. He's remembering Hashem. He's remembering God. That's a measure of humility. Because of that measure of humility, that it's not me, it's God. That's what gave him the ability, the granting of the ability to read the dreams, right? Exactly because of his humility. Where else do we see that? Moshe Rabbeinu got the leadership of Am Yisrael and got the prophecy because of his humility, right? He was known, his main thing was, he was known as a person of humility. Ish Anav. That's his most famous thing, was that he was a person of humility.
Bob Dylan.
And then that is, and actually what I just said about where he mentioned Hashem every time, that's from Nechama Leibowitz. Nechama Leibowitz is one of the most famous interpreters of the Tanakh ever, a woman, and her books are famous, and she's the one who pointed this out, that if you look at everything he said, he always credited God. Yosef always credited God. So the test for us, Chanukah falls right into that. Chanukah is the test for us of our humility, right? Who do we take credit for the battles? Do we take credit for what happened over there? They didn't, right? What was the first thing they did when they could? Don't forget that war was like 25 years. I always thought it was like 2 years. It was a 25-year guerrilla war. They had plenty of losses. They lost almost all their leadership. Ultimately, they were able to take the temple back. What they do? The first thing they did was go to light the menorah. First thing they did,
It was dark,
right?
yeah.
So that's the test for us. How do we respond to our successes? Do we give Hashem credit for our successes? And related to that, I saw this great thing. So this guy, Tzvi Yecheskeli, right? This guy is unbelievable. I don't know if he has in English. I think he's got English books, just came out. This guy lived among the Arabs as an Arab for years, for like 2 years. I think he might have done it for the Mossad, I'm not sure. But he has an encyclopedic knowledge of Palestinian
Culture.
and the way they live and everything, right? So this guy, I think he's worth listening to, right? Because he knows what he's talking about. So he became a rabbi. So he brought out this thing from Rabbi Nachman, right? He said that victory, it's very hard for a human to reconcile two things, victory and truth, right? It's very hard to do both for us as humans because we're very easy to sacrifice truth on the altar of victory, right? And we actually see that with our enemies, right? The truth doesn't matter to them at all. And even for us, right? It's hard for us to do that. But who's the one force in the universe that can have the victory of real truth? It's Hashem, right? It's very hard for a human, but Hashem can. That's why when we involve ourselves in whatever battles we have with God, when we align with God, then we can participate in the real true victory, the victory of truth. It's a victory and it's a true victory. And that's what Chanukah is, right? That's what Chanukah is. And what is the truth, right? What's the truth that we need to know? That we're Jews. What our fate is, what our mission is, and what our truth is, right? That's the most important thing we have. And we can't forget that. We can't win without it. When we recognize it, when we're with Hashem, that's when we have true victory. And we can show humility exactly because we're doing the victory with Hashem, and we recognize that. The connection to Chanukah further is there's the first night. Tonight's 2 nights. He actually made this last night. The first candle is a unitary candle. It's one candle, right? One light. That represents all of us. That represents all of us. After that, there's another candle lit each night. But that extra one always is connected to the first one. The first one is alone, right? Initially. That is an indication. That indicates that's us, right? That's us, our ability to shine. But it's only one. So you have to be humble, right? You're only one. But by recognizing our truth and by connecting ourselves to Hashem, then we're able to grow the light amongst ourselves, right? With other people. We have 10 guys here tonight. 10 guys. If one was missing, we would have 9. We wouldn't be able to say Kaddish, right? We have 10 guys, but it all starts with one person. Without the one person, we'd be lacking. We'd be lacking, and that's how we connect to that. This is also a little bit far afield from Yosef, but the humility, that's the point of what he's saying. The humility that Yosef showed, the humility that Moshe Rabbeinu showed, the humility that the Maccabim showed when they took over and they lit everything and they recognized that their victory was tied to God. That's the humility that we can show individually and understand that we are tied to Hashem. The victories that we have, the things that we have are tied to Hashem, and by doing that, by recognizing that, we project light individually that then we can connect with everybody else and include more light. So just a few little things now on there's all these different customs that are kind of cool, right? So the first question is, that's also a very common question, is why did they even need to find this one container of pure oil, right? The truth is they didn't. Right? They could have used oil that was not pure. Nobody was pure back then. In a time when nobody's pure, they didn't need to use pure oil. Right? There was oil there's plenty of oil there. They didn't need to do it. Right? Richie and I were talking about it this morning, I think, right? Yesterday morning or this morning, right? And so one of the things that we were talking about, and one of the things that I saw also here, is they actually needed to do it, right? They needed to do everything the right way. Why? Don't forget, they had fought for so many years. They were exhausted, right? Now they're coming there, They couldn't go and say, we're going to do half measures. They had to set an example for the people. So no matter what, they were showing faith in God, right? By looking for, even though it was only one container. But B, as leaders, they could not just say, listen, it's good enough to use thank you. We can't cut corners. We can't cut corners. We sacrifice too much. We work too hard. We can't tell everybody to do everything just right, and then we're going to cut corners. We're leaders. So they went, and the miracle is, and then Rav Soloveitchik said, he said that's why there's an extra day. You asked about the extra day, right? That's why there's an extra day. There's an extra day because the first day, it stayed lit for 7 days. The extra day is in honor of their stubbornness and dedication in looking for that container, that pure container of oil. That's why we had the extra day, in honor of them. What? Syrians they have a different can, not an extra day. They have an extra candle. We'll talk about that. Hold on, we'll get to that. It's on the side. There's so that's like a really interesting thing. That's ultimately. So that's why there's a. It stayed lit for 7 days, 8 days, and then the 8th day is for their dedication. Yeah, no, neither did I. It's Rav Soloveitchik. He's a smart guy. So, okay. So that is why they did not use just any oil, right? That's why they didn't use any oil. Now, here's an interesting thing. Does the Torah mention Chanukah at all? Okay. So it says the word or, light, is the 25th word in the Torah. Right, you know, when we learn Breshit, it's the 25th word of the Torah. Chanukah falls out on the 25th of Kislev, or 25, right? The second time we see an allusion to Chanukah is when Bnei Israel is in the desert, and on the journey they make all these stops, and then there's a list of all the stops. I think we even talked about it, right? Did we do that? Yeah, there's like a whole list of all the stops, and the 25th stop was in the city of Hashmona, like Hashmonaim. Is it a coincidence?
There's no coincidence.
Or is it kind of just really cool? Kind of really cool. Okay, another interesting minhag is that people used to light the menorah outside, right? And in Israel, they still do it, especially in Yerushalayim. That's why you'll see pictures in Yerushalayim. There's like a box outside.
Milk box.
Yeah, it looks like a mailbox almost. It's clear. They do it outside, right? Us from Europe, we couldn't do it outside for 2 reasons. The weather was bad, and the goyim would destroy it, right? But they used to actually do it outside. Where they do it? By the door. Which side of the door? The left side. Why? Because the mezuzah was on the right side. So the menorah went on the left side, so you'd have kedusha, you'd have holiness on both sides as you went in and out. So that was actually pretty cool also. In the Al Hanisim prayer, when we say Al Hanisim, we add the prayer, the word hand is mentioned 5 times. We just talked about 5 times. Binyamin got 5 times the amount.
What do we say? So,
Binyamin got
Wait,
Al Hanisim Val Purkam Val Kashua, right? It says, you delivered the mighty into the hand of the weak, the many into the hand of the few, the impure into the hand of the pure, the wicked into the hand of the righteous, and the wanton sinners into the hand of those who occupy themselves with Torah. So the 5 times that we mention hand corresponds to the amount that Binyamin got 5 times more than his brothers. Then it also says in when Yosef has when they have the meal, they talk about Yosef talks about 5 times. It talks about that he gave the food to them in their hands, but it says beyad, in one hand. It doesn't say biyadei, in many hands. So why does it say? It should say he gave it to their hands, right? It says one hand. Why? Because that is a hint to us, and he was hinting to his brothers who didn't get it at that point, that, we're all made with many hands, but we are successful when we act as one hand, right? And that is today, we also see that, right? When everybody was all upset in Israel and everybody was fighting each other, what did we see? People said, no. They said, we can't be like this. We have to be an egruf. Egruf means a fist. They'd say, we can't be like this. We have to be like this. We have to be together. So that was a hint there when he said one hand. He didn't say many hands. There's a couple of other interesting leading things, but I think it's too late. I'm going to finish off with one thing. When we say Hallel, hold on, let me get this. So during Pesach, we say Hallel, and one of the chapters in Hallel says very specifically. Give me a second. Here. Hold on. Here we go. So we say Hallel, right? We say Hallel every day of Chanukah. Listen to this, okay? So one of the things we say is, from out of distress I call upon God. God answered me. The Lord is with me among my helpers. I will see the downfall of my enemies. It's better to rely on the Lord than to trust in man. It's better to rely on the Lord than to trust in nobles. All the nations surrounded me, but in the name of the Lord I will cut them down. They surrounded me. They encompassed me, but in the name of the Lord I will cut them down. They surrounded me like bees, yet they will be extinguished like fiery thorns. In the name of the Lord I will cut them down. You, my foes, repeatedly pushed me to fall, but the Lord helped me. God is my strength and song. He has been a help to me. This is what happened in Chanukah. That's why one of the reasons we read it, right? We thank God. And it, more than anything, it's relatable to exactly now, right? If you can't believe the miracles that we're living through, right? We're totally surrounded, like bees, like hornets. They surrounded us. They pinched us. They stung us badly, continue to sting us. But in the name of Hashem, we're humble, just like Yosef, just like Moshe Rabbeinu. We stay humble. You can't believe the things people putting on tzitzit, people davening, people lighting the candles. They just had at the beginning of a soccer match just now. You saw that? Everybody saw it, right? So there was a soccer match, and at the soccer match, one of the Chabad guys is lighting the candles, and everybody says Amen, and then they sing Maoz Tzur. A stadium full of people. Would you believe? Listen, would my parents, when they were sitting, your parents, when they were sitting in a camp, would they imagine that not even 100 years later, there'd be stadiums full of Jews saying Chanukah things with the bees buzzing around?
Was it in Israel?
It was in Israel. Cut down, not at a little cost to us. Cut down. This is the connection between the Parsha and our lives now is exactly this. Yosef trusted in Hashem. Yosef never forgot Hashem, even though he looked just like an Egyptian. We look like Americans, right? We live in their world. There's nothing wrong with it. But we never forget. We can't forget who we are, where we come from, what our mission is. Our brothers and sisters, we help them tremendously, right? It's the beginning of the war, we were all beside ourselves. People who weren't connected were connected. We who are connected became more connected. The bees have been eliminated, and they're being eliminated every day more and more. More and more. Unbelievable things. Why? Because we trust in God. We don't forget who we are. That's the lesson of Yosef. That's the lesson of Chanukah. That's the lesson for now.
Excellent.
Wow.
Excellent.